I'm going to hit record for us. Well, welcome everyone. It looks like we have some new faces, some regular faces. I am so excited. I have to say, I'm having an amazing Friday. Every single meeting I've had today has been just so wonderful. I'm so blessed in what I have. I know that it's challenging sometimes and it can be difficult to focus on the good, but Suman and I look forward to this every single Friday, whether we're hitting record or not. So I will kick us off with our housekeeping rules today, or what I learned, someone said recently, hospitality rules. That's more inclusive language. So we're all about diversity, equity, inclusion here. So we are back at Friday, kicking off the series. So I'm so excited. Last week we did an unrecorded session. This week and next week, we have guest speakers. So today we have Tiffany Salaam with us. She's going to talk to us about leadership with compassion. And I can't wait to do that. I'll give her a nice intro in a moment here. But we want to just remind you all that this is a safe space. Suman and I have worked very hard to create that. So we encourage you to use the chat to unmute. Feel free, if you're not comfortable on camera, you can turn that off because we are recording. And if, we know sometimes people are at work or what have you, it may just not be comfortable. So we'll go for about an hour here. Once we're done recording, we'll typically spend 15, 20 minutes, 30. I know Dwayne's going to hem me up on this. He's always like more like an hour, but we're going to do that and just kind of turn the camera off. If you want to talk, further, if you have to go for the day, we absolutely respect that. But all opinions are welcome here as long as you're being respectful to everyone. So that's kind of the schedule for January. The one thing we are now implementing 2 unrecorded sessions per month. So this week we had last week and next week, and now in February we'll have 2 unrecorded as well. So look for the February schedule coming out very soon. Suman, anything else you want to touch on before I introduce Tiffany?
Yeah, so first just wanted to give a quick welcome to everyone who's joining us today, whether it's live or on replay. Use the chat feature. I know a lot of times people are at the office or in a place where they're not able to talk. The chat feature between Tiffany and I, we moderate that. So please share your thoughts and opinions respectfully on that chat feature. And I think that's about it. Thank you for joining us. And I'm excited to hear from our guest today.
Yes, so welcome to the stage today, Miss Tiffany Salaam. Thank you. Tiffany is a dear friend. We actually were colleagues at one point, and I know from working with her that she has lots of experience to share. So she currently serves as the Director of Learning and Development at a healthcare organization in Wisconsin. Her responsibilities include learning technology, team member development, and she's so good at that. She's such a good leader. Diversity, equity, inclusion, learning strategy, and conference center operations. So that is all the wonderful that she's doing right now. She's worked in human resources in various capacities and multiple industries. She holds a PhD from Cardinal Stritch University in Education and Leadership, a Master of Arts and degree in Adult Education and Instructional Design, and Organizational Development from Alverno College, and a Bachelor of Science degree in Public Administration and Poli-Sci from University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. She's a member of Alpha Kappa, I can never say these words together, Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, and enjoys spending time with family, friends, traveling, jazz, volunteering, and being an active member at her church. Welcome, Tiffany. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I don't take this for granted at all. So folks having taken the time out to just chat with us in this discussion it's just a wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. Do you want to tell us maybe a little bit about why you were so passionate about this title and what prompted you, besides me being like, hey, Tiffany, I know you're amazing. Would you like to come join us and speak? What's kind of, one highlight that brought you here that you're looking forward to sharing with us today?
Well, that's a great question. I know that, since March, there have been of last year, so many things that have taken place, right? From COVID, the social unrest, the economic uncertainties within our country, just the incivility, just the lack of being able to have conversation, right? To agree to disagree. And so compassion is just something that has resonated with me. It keeps coming back to me as we continue to experience these things. And being a compassionate leader, a compassionate person is something that I think we need to see more in the workplace, more in our communities, more just in our social settings, even if you're at the grocery store. And I think somehow we've moved away from that. And so that's the word that has resonated with me since March, was compassion, empathy. Empathy is another word that has resonated with me. So just having difficulty, just struggling with some of the things that's transpired. And I do apologize. That must be the Amazon delivery driver. My husband has ordered several things from Amazon and they just keep coming and keep coming.
We get it. My wine came today. I get it. It's
okay.
The times we're living in, right?
Yes. So I apologize for the doorbell. Yes, and the person's just going to keep ringing.
They want that wine and delivered right now. Bring it on. It's the weekend. It
always happens. They'll be fine. They'll be fine.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's, so when, we were talking about just a topic that just resonated with me around compassion and empathy.
Okay. And I know, being a leader yourself, you obviously, I've had the wonderful opportunity to work alongside you when as a business partner. And I know that sometimes things come up and people get stressed. And especially in 2020, I think a lot of us found ourselves in a position of being stressed. So it sounds like empathy and that compassion and just self-awareness is really key in order to lead with compassion. What do you think? Do you think it's a lack of self-awareness, or why do you think that these leaders necessarily don't fall into that space of leading with compassion? Have you found that there's one trend or one kind of common theme of a barrier?
And that's a good question. I think leaders think it's an and or. It's an or. And I'm just gonna, regardless as to what your political affiliation is or isn't, it doesn't have to be an or. You need to do this or this. It can be an and, right? So maybe we can do this and we can do that. But I think it's so divisive when we feel like we have to pick and choose sides. So everyone is on a side. And the side is not necessarily the best side to be on. Maybe they're somewhere in the middle. That's how I look at the and. The and is in the middle. And so if we're all picking sides, then we're never going to get to a resolution. And so for me, as I just, I try to be reflective, and I don't pretend to be all knowing, but I do know what my eyes see. And I do know what I have been seeing in the media, social media, on, just watching TV, all of those things where we have access, that people think it's one or the other. And it's really an and. We can do both. We can demonstrate empathy and behavior for others. I may not agree, but we need to figure out how we can disagree. And then once we have established that we don't necessarily agree, right? Then how can we say, okay, what's the middle ground? Here's the and. You can agree to disagree. We're not going to all think the same. I mean, that would be a boring world, right? Everybody thought the same, act the same. But the reality is that I think we need to get to and. I think we need to get to and be able to have conversations without it's just so volatile and I'm right, you're wrong, and we don't look to see the other person's side. We all, I think it's, the cycle of social humanization is we all grew up in different places and spaces. We were raised differently, grew up in different neighborhoods, had different experiences, churches, life experiences. And so we realize that there is difference. And that is the great, I want to say, pleasure about diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it's different. Well, we've got to figure out, how do we still function in this society with these differences? And I don't think that we're not doing a good job as leaders. We're not doing a good job as adults. And I know that may sound critical and harsh, but that's our reality. And what kind of example are we showing for our kids as they come up and grow up? What do they think as to how the adults are acting in the room? The adults are supposed to be the ones who, are more reserved and, polished, and be able to, agree to disagree in a different way. So it's really concerning to me as to where we're going, to the point where I think about it daily. Just interactions, you go to the grocery store and, everyone's so focused on me, that, we don't even take the time to just, open up the door. And I know we're all wearing masks, so you can't see the smile on my face, but you can see the smile in my eyes, So, these old, I want to say, my daughter would probably say, some of the stuff is talked about is old school, but we need to revisit some old school stuff because that is kind of the human element of it. So I don't know if I answer your question, Tiffany, but it's just, I don't know. It's an opportunity just to just be more reflective. And I think it is emotional intelligence. We need to be reflective about our behavior, how we act. What we're putting out, the energy that we're putting out into the world. So,
yep.
No, that definitely answered it.
1,000%.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Tiffany, go on.
No, you're good. You're good.
I agree 1,000% with what you're saying. So you talked about going old school. I say that often to my kids, while I'm a progressive thinker and look into the future, a lot of the things that I grew up with are things that I feel like we are losing out on, right? And so being in the corporate world, are there one or two examples of where you have seen when this shift happened from teams and leaders sort of creating a community and the loyalties to how things are changing and happening now with the lack of compassion? Growing up, my mother always said, you need to be loyal to the company because they'll take care of you. That's what my mom did, right? She was with the same company her entire career, and every buyout, she kept going with them. They kept bringing her on because she was loyal to them. And that wasn't necessarily true for my generation or for our generation. So have you seen, or can you give examples of where you may have seen that sort of shift happening? Like what might have been happening at the executive level for us to move from that area of let's be loyal to our employees so they're loyal to us to where we are now?
Yeah. And that's a good question. I think, I think it was always the underbelly. I think it was always there, right? I think it just didn't show up like it's shown up now. I think there were little spots of it in different places and spaces within within organizations. I think that, to your point about your mom, I think it was a different generation. I think the generations are now speaking up in ways that hasn't happened before. And I think, and I think about baby boomers, which my parents are a part of. To your point, my dad worked at the same company for like 30 years or what have you. And that's rare in some aspects. Maybe not necessarily in healthcare from a clinical standpoint, but I know in some industries that's rare for people to stay in roles in companies for 30 years. And I think it's a huge shift in how we prioritize. I don't know, I was reading this book And I think it's called Bowling Alone. And I don't know if anyone has ever read this book. And it speaks to, and I can't think of the author, his name is slipping me now. Maybe I'll remember it before our time is ended. But he talked about how people live in communities, right? And people don't even know their neighbors, and so they don't even know their neighbors. You can work with people and you don't really have a lot of interaction with the people that you work with. Yes, Bowling Alone. Thank you so much, Ellie, I think. Or is it Ellie or Eli? Thank you so much for that. But that book just really resonated with me because it just talked about how we have a lack of community. And and I think, to your point, it's been there, but it's been the underbelly. And as I've tried to describe to others, I think COVID pulled back the curtain and really revealed and showed us where we have some significant flaws in this country, significant flaws. And I think it's always been there, but people haven't either felt comfortable to speak up about it, or it's almost like it has to be, my grandmother used to say, there's a season for everything. There's a time for everything. And maybe it's always been there, but now this is the time. This is the time to see things differently and not bowl alone. I mean, none of us will go to the bowling alley alone, right? But we live in isolation. We live without even, like I said, knowing who lives next door to us, interacting with our colleagues at work. It's just very, we live in some aspects in isolation because, and I don't know how we necessarily got there, but I feel like it's been evolving over a period of time that has led us to this. Did I answer? Does that make sense?
Yep, it definitely does. I think you hit it on the head, is this lack of community, right? So back in the 60s, when our parents were in their youth, it was all about reaching out and taking care of each other. And, you leave your kids at the neighbor's house, or family was always around. And over the decades, we've moved away from that. And I think it's trickled now into the workplace as well with all of this, right? Is that you go to work and then you leave. That's it. My work is my job. I don't want it to become part of my life. And it's a very different mindset from when our parents were at work, right? Like I said, my mom, she was like, I need the job. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to be loyal. It's almost an assimilation. I feel like my mother went through. She assimilated and became as much as she could. I mean, she was an immigrant, so that was another reason she felt the need to assimilate. And as a woman in corporate America back in the 60s, her need to assimilate made her sort of mold into what they were looking for. Absolutely. And so I'm wondering if the whole idea of accept me for who I am and I'm not going to change who I am has sort of also pushed us away from that world of compassion and understanding each other and accepting each other for who you are, versus they're not fitting into our corporate culture and our corporate mold. Yeah. So let's, we can always find someone to replace that individual. If they don't fit, move on. Like the whole fitting in.
Yeah, that you bring up a good point around, assimilating to the work environment. And I go back to the generation where how the generations think differently. So I was having a discussion with a friend of mine, and we were talking about her daughter we were just talking about just the differences in, working in corporate America or just working in general. And I was saying to her, so currently right now I have my hair in braids, and we were talking about, how it's changed and evolved over a period of time where, maybe I wouldn't have felt so comfortable in wearing braids, years ago, I said, but now, I do. And so her daughter, she kind of made me kind of jolt back, and she said, because I said to her, look how far, we've advanced. And she said, that's your measuring stick? And I said, what? She said, why is your hair a factor? And she caught me off guard. And I was kind of like this, stumbling around my words, because in her mind, the bar, that's a low bar for her. In her generation, as a millennial, that's a low bar to be able to say, oh, now I'm at a point in my career where, I feel as if, I can bring my whole self to work, and it doesn't, matter, exactly how I wear my hair. I won't be judged. But in her mind, she was like, why is that even an issue? Why does that even matter? And so when we think about just the point of simulation and a simulation, people were just, I think people did what they had to do in order to take care of their families. But I think now that's, people are like, if you don't accept me for who I am and being I'll go find another organization that will. So that's, it's kind of that dancing game where you have the younger generation explain to you, and I'm Generation X, where they're just like, some of the stuff that you all have had to deal with in your life, we're not doing that. We're not, that's unacceptable in what you're putting up with. So I just find it that kind of jolted me back to say, do I need to have a higher level of standard or regard? Have I just kind of said, oh, okay, well, this is okay, we've moved this far? And her reality was, no, that's really sad. She said, gotta appreciate the millennials, right?
Say it like it is, right?
Right, absolutely.
So we've got our chat once again. Thank you, amazing community is blowing up, and I'm loving this. So Shannon put a really good quote here. She said, something I've been focused on is a quote from Albert Einstein. No problem can be solved from the same conscientiousness that created it. We must learn to see the world anew. That's pretty powerful.
That is very powerful. And I'm going to take that. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. We'll save the chat and share it. So
yes, please. Yes, absolutely.
Let's see what else is here. So Dwayne says, first he apologizes for the essay, but Dwayne, you should know there's no apologies in this group. So
yeah.
The business owners I've counseled around anger management and family violence grew up without compassion at home. They became extremely driven to overcome the negative voices, in parentheses, parents, in the back of their head. And men in general tend to wrap their identity in their work and financial success. Totally imbalanced and can lack empathy and understanding when others cannot meet their expectations. This typically shows up as compulsive personality traits, very rigid ideals and perfections, and become judge, jury, and executioner to those who don't measure up. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting. I think it's valid too, because, as you think about just, roles, because a lot of the jobs and roles, that's who they are. And if they don't have that, then they're not quite sure as to who they are. I mean, because you think about it, if you go to when we were attending social events, right, the conversation would come up, as everybody has said, well, where do you work? Well, what do you do for a living? Because we're so kind of tied into where we work, how much money we make, because men are looking at, some men, as to what the point was made around, taking care of the families. And there could be some lack of compassion there. That's very interesting. Have to make a note of that. I'm a note taker because I try to, when we were talking about emotional intelligence, I try to be self-reflective and self-aware. And so when people say things that are thoughtful, that gives me a different perspective, I don't want to beat that perspective up, because then what I'm saying is I'm not living out what I'm saying. So I want to be thoughtful about that. So that's why I have my notebook.
We appreciate you for that. So one of the topics, and this is how Suman and I saw that she put in the chat that we've been on this endeavor, this wonderful journey since June 11th. And part of how that started is because we're like, we want to support people and give some tools for individuals who may be coming into the workplace after these major earth-shattering events, who are leaders and wondering what to do with their team. So what tips would you give us in terms of showing up for your team in these times? I know that Sue and I have been very vulnerable in these moments and some of these, and we have broken down into tears. Some of our audience has broken into tears because it's not easy. And I think that, you know, if we equip these workplaces and leaders and employees with compassion, coworker to coworker, leader to employee, we can't just pretend like things aren't happening. And I see way too often people just like, all right, we're going to start this meeting, let's go. Did you just see what happened back there though? Can we not leave an elephant in the room? So what tips would you give us to lead with compassion that way and be even peer to peer, coworker to coworker? How do we support each other in these very uncertain times?
You know, and again, I go back to, you know, something my grandmother said: you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And that means that you should listen more and talk less. And when you have team members, your colleagues, and something has happened, you don't have to solve the world's problems. It's because some of this stuff is out of our realm. We can't solve the problems. We have to think about our scope of influence. What can we influence to help support this team member? And when I think about just all of the things that have gone, to listen and listen with empathy and listen without judgment. You know, that's difficult, right? For some, to listen with empathy and without judgment. Because I don't know your background, I don't know your situation, but I do know, I live in Wisconsin and live in Milwaukee, and, you know, with the Jacob Blake and folks who lived in Kenosha. And I don't know I don't know this, the full scope of the story. They shared it on the news, but people are impacted by that because they live in Kenosha. So to start a meeting and not at least acknowledge it, that does a disservice to that team member's engagement. You don't know if they live in the area, if they came home and they found, the police, the National Guard in their area. There was a curfew that was implemented. There was some some vandalism that took place. There was protesting. All of those things get into our psyche. So for us to just go on as business as usual, how can we do that? And then expect our team members to perform and to just say, okay, now everybody go out and do the work when we don't know. So I think, to answer your question, one, we have to listen, and we have to create psychological safety to create those conversations. And again, you have to go into it as I can't solve the world's problems, but listen to your team members to say, how are you feeling? Is there anything that I can do that's in my span of control? Maybe my span of control is you start work at 7. Maybe you can start work at 9 o'clock, right? Or maybe you can leave early. There was, when they had, a curfew that was issued, ask your team members, be curious and ask your team members, is this impacting anyone that they need to leave early? Maybe they need to go get gas. Ask the question, but we just can't go on as business as usual. Like this isn't affecting you, even if it's not in the community. Many of you may have seen George Floyd. We saw the video. Most people seen the video. I mean, how can we just, say, okay, well, that was in Minnesota. People of color reacted to that in a different way, what they saw. So if you have people of color who who are on your team, you do a disservice to not even ask them how they're doing. You do a disservice to not even say, and even other team members who are not to ask the question. I mean, I think we get to the point where we're just so busy about, okay, the day to day, but we've got to address the elephant in the room. We've got to address that there are healthcare disparities. We've got to address that there is police brutality, that the current laws that we have are leaned towards one group more favorably than another. We've got to address that. And my husband is a retired Milwaukee police homicide detective. He served for 25 years. So you can imagine the lively discussions that we have at our house pertaining to law enforcement. We've got to have these discussions. And again, it's really around acknowledging that it happened and then thinking about what's your span of influence. What can I do to help support my team members? What can I do? I don't think any of us have, well, I don't know. I'm going to speak for myself. I've never walked into the workplace and seen the National Guard while I'm trying to get to work. I've never had that experience. And psychologically, I can only imagine how the impact to some of the, employees and how they feel. So I think we just have to address it. As you can tell, I'm passionate about this.
I love your
Definitely
passion.
see that.
Love
it. I love it. So, Tiffany and I have been doing this, as she mentioned, since June. And one of the reoccurring questions that have sort of lingered in here is, as leaders, if they come and ask their team, how is it going? And you do all the right things, right? You create a space on the agenda, you try to have the conversations, but your team does not want to share or says everything is fine. And inside as a leader, that may not be the case. How do we move that conversation? Do we move the conversation? Do we just leave it where it is? Because the onus really does fall on the team or the individual members. What happens in that scenario? And I know that's been a question that's been asked a couple of times of some of our guests in the past.
I'm going to take, and that's a great question. I'm going to take a step back just a little bit from that before I respond to that. So how have you showed up as a leader before all of this? Because you've got to ask yourself, have I demonstrated some behaviors that would prevent my team members from feeling comfortable in sharing how they feel? Have I said some things that could come off as, maybe I haven't created psychological safety. Maybe I haven't created those spaces to have these conversations because I've said some things that potentially could be political or hurtful or some derogatory things. And so now as a leader, I'm asking my team, how can I help? So it's almost like you're contradicting yourself. So if you're as a leader, if you've made some comments and said some things that have been inappropriate, now you're asking for your team to feel open and to communicate with you. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. So, that's the first question you have to ask yourself. Have I shown up in a way that my team would feel comfortable in sharing? And if they still don't, how can I, if I've answered the question that I haven't, I've created an environment of psychological safety, that I've put my team first, that I've withheld my own personal beliefs and didn't voice those where they could have heard them, and they still don't want to, they still don't feel comfortable in sharing, then my role is to say, when you get ready, I'm here to listen. When you get ready, my door is open when you get ready. I don't want to pressure anyone, but I just want you to know that I'm here to listen and we can have a conversation or a discussion. But if you fall on the ladder and you haven't shown up as a leader in the way that you've kept your personal beliefs and you've been judgmental or vocal about certain things that would contradict what you're asking them to do, then you're going to have some problems. You're going to have some challenges because you've lost credibility. And you may need to bring someone else in, you know, HR business partner or another leader who can have those types of conversations, because you're going to have to rebuild your credibility with that team because you've lost it. And you're going to have to regain it in some way.
I love that. I love that you touched on these partnerships that can happen. And I love the conversation around, we can all influence, right? We can all manage what's in our span of control. We can all manage how we react to things, how we respond to our team, how we support them or not. So, you know, a lot of what I talk about with people that I help support is, what is the brand that you want to have out there, particularly for new leaders? I love to have this conversation. What is the brand that you're trying to build? And sometimes they get so hung up in everything that has to happen within the organization, or just feeling like, well, I don't know where to start. You have to start somewhere, because what happens if you don't is you leave folks behind, like what you're saying. And so it's so critical, so that if we don't have the resources or we're not sure where to start, then you have to pull in a partner. You have to find someone to help support you. But none of us are in this alone. Most of you have heard me, a lot of you have heard me say, together is better, together we can, together we will. And I live that out. I really believe that. That's why we created this space. But if you don't pull somebody in and you just are trying to flounder on your own, that's when probably you're not going to ask the question, or you're not going to have that tough conversation, because you're like, oh, what if I walk into something that I never intended to? What if they take this in a way that I never meant it? Sometimes we get our best lessons from just walking right into it. And so I think that's the point that Suman and I certainly have been very consistent with driving. So if you are a leader of teams, you know, that's really important. I love what you're doing here.
Yeah, I mean, leadership is tough. I mean, anyone leading people, I mean, there's a lot of books on it, but, you know, it's almost like, you know, parenting. You know, you can have all the books in the world, but until you're in it, that's when you're really learning, right? You know, you can, you know, they can say, okay, to be a great leader, you need to follow these 5 steps. Well, let's add some scenarios and some circumstances and things that have been thrown at you. Those 5 steps may not go exactly in order. You're trying to, you know, you're really trying to figure it out. So I think, you know, we just have to, you know, it's not easy, but we have to, you know, assume positive intent and go into it and try to go into it with a, you know, that we want to be, you know, think about a leader that you just could not work with, or a leader who you just said they were just a bad leader. They were bad. Polar opposite of that. do the opposite of what they were giving to you. Whatever that is, just do the opposite, because again, we're going to make mistakes, and then you got to own it. You got to be transparent about it and say, you know what, that was my mistake, or I shouldn't have said that, and be willing to learn. You know, our teams are very diverse, and it's okay that you don't know certain things. It's okay, especially culturally. When you talk about certain things, it's okay to ask the questions, if it's genuine, right? If it's genuine, if it's not showing up as, well, why are you doing that? No, if it's genuine, that you really want to learn and know about why, like for example, my husband is Muslim, and a lot of people will ask, around Ramadan. So he fasts from sun up to sundown during Ramadan for 30 days. And, he goes to the mosque. And if you have employees who are Muslim, it's okay if you don't know, but if you want to learn, it's okay to ask. We're so afraid. And I know we're afraid because we don't want to offend and we don't want to make the wrong, say the wrong things. But you could also ask for, I apologize. You can say it up front. I apologize if, I'm asking this the wrong way, but I really want to know and understand how I can support. So I really think it's, we got to be okay to, as they talk, I think it's a book called, fail fast or something, I can't think of the name of the book, but if you're going to fail fast and apologize faster, right? Do it sooner than later, versus waiting to, and having that team member or colleague walk away thinking that, wow, that was being insensitive. Or you got to be able to read people and discern, how they are responding to your question if they're making them, if you're making them feel uneasy.
And I think those are great points, and as someone who, my family is Hindu, and from India, and so we get a lot of questions, right? And I think part of the challenge is you get so tired of answering the same questions over and over and over again, right? So I like to add, do some work on yourself before you ask these questions, and then come to it from that genuine curiosity. So I read this, or I heard this, or this is what people in the community are talking about when it comes to Ramadan, or other Muslim or Hindu, or even in the Black community, or right, the Latinx community. Here are the things I've read, or here are the things that I'm seeing. I have some questions. Can we have a conversation? I think that's at least that's the way I feel more comfortable having the conversation, is knowing that someone has done some work before coming to me, rather than, oh, so I saw this on TV and they had, on The Simpsons, Abu talks like this, this, and this. And what do you think? Is that how it is too in your house? And it's like, don't come to me talking to me like that.
Absolutely. Yes. You have to do some work. Absolutely. Yes. And I apologize for not mentioning. You have to do some work. Mm-hmm. It's our responsibility to educate ourselves. We figure out, as the doorbell rang, we figure out how to order Amazon. We figure out how to do all this navigating via technology. Well, we need to figure out how to educate ourselves as well. I remember for undergrad, I went to UW-Stevens Point, and it was a predominantly white institution. It was 8,400 students, and there was 40 students of color. And it was an interesting experience, because many of the students who came to UW-Stevens Point were raised in small towns and on farms. Like my roommate, she lived on an apple farm, and obviously I'm a city girl, so I had never been to an apple farm. They made apple juice, and her parents would bring apple juice, and I just thought that was the best thing in the world. And I didn't have any preconceived thoughts or ideas about her being on the farm at all. But it was interesting that she thought I grew up poor, based upon what she had watched some shows on TV, to your point, and that I came from a a single parent household, just based on, and she never even talked to me. You know, she never really even asked until I invited her to Milwaukee. And my parents, middle class, my dad worked every day, my mom stayed at home, and we were fine as kids. I never recall going without anything. And she was shocked and surprised how we lived. And she had already told herself a story about what she was going to experience. And she, later on, and her and I are still friends today, she apologized because she thought, she was like, Tiffany, I really didn't know you at all. I made a lot of assumptions about your life and your experiences. And when you brought me home and I saw this, I felt bad, like, oh my gosh. And so she made it a mission to kind of say that she needed to educate herself outside of what she was seeing on TV, and make sure that her, and she calls her small group of friends her board of directors. And so she wanted to make sure that her board of directors are diverse and have different practices, you know, different backgrounds, so that when she needs to reach out, she doesn't want to say, oh, well, I don't have anyone to kind of have that conversation with in a safe space or a safe place. And she's been very intentional about this. So I appreciate her for that, making sure that she still lives on the apple farm and still sends me apple juice. So.
I love it. So just as we're getting up to the hour, I'd love if we can just sort of come back to that compassionate leadership. Someone asked a really good question, is how do we build it into the foundation of the work culture?
So, you know, one of the things that, and I was reading an article, and it's called by Entrepreneur, and I can send that to everyone. And they talked about 7 tips. And I've read this, I read the article, I want to say maybe a month ago. And so I'll just share those with you. One is learning. We should never stop wanting to learn. That's around being a compassionate leader. We should never stop wanting to learn. And learning is by asking questions and being curious. 2 was removing barriers for your team members. Remove those barriers that prevent them from being successful. And if you can, if you have the ability to do so. And if you don't, be honest about some of the things that may prevent you from doing so, because we all have a leader who we work for, right? So there may be some things that we can't remove those barriers. 3 is the impact. We should live to help others. That's why we're called leaders. We're leading people. We should live to impact others in a way that's positive, that they have a good experience, and the way that we want people to be reflective about, wow, that was, I remember when, you know, Elizabeth did this for me. And that goes throughout their career. Have standards. 4, have standards. Making sure that people are accountable, and that if they're not, then you address that lack of accountability. You have to have some level of standard as a leader. 5 was influence. Seek influence, not authority. Seek influence and not authority. Being able to influence your team members to do whatever it is that you want them to do by, you know, asking questions, listening, removing barriers. 6, have passion and let that passion be demonstrated. Have passion about the work. Have passion about the engagement, the impact of what's going on in the community, in the communities, and how that can impact them as they do their day-to-day work. excuse me, and the last one was 7, which was team. It takes a team to be successful. And that, and within that team, you're going to have potentially some dysfunction, but you're going to have to figure out how to work through that. And knowing that you may not get it right all the time. So those are kind of the 7 key tips and principles that I try to follow. I mean, I'm sure there's some others that people have experienced and have worked well for them. But those really resonated with me, and I try to just be mindful in that space. And if I had to add an 8th one, learn how to create psychological safety.
I love that. I love that. So maybe then I know we're always having, we're always kind of seeing what time it is to be mindful of everyone's time, but I'd love just kind of to dovetail off of that, or to give maybe some solutions for if that's not happening, right? Like, what if you're seeing the worst of the worst every day, and people don't feel, or these organizations don't feel a corporate responsibility to do that? Like, is there a corporate responsibility to have people do that? Like, should these organizations be responsible? And if they're not, like, how as individuals even can people impact that? Like, do organizations have that corporate responsibility? And if not, like, can we maybe get on the path to that?
I would say everything is the bottom line, right? How much money are we making? Organizations, I don't know, one organization that's not open, that they want to have, make some money, especially in corporate America. Nonprofits, their vision is a little bit different because it's around social justice and the community and things like that. So that's where they're getting their energy and fee from. But I think if you put it into dollars and cents and understand the return on investment and the value proposition and what it's being added to do, if we do this, if you may have to do some legwork, but if we do this, this is the impact. If we look at our turnover, we have a significant amount of turnover, and let's say, people of color in a particular department. This is how much it's costing us every time somebody walks out the door. This is what it's going to cost us if we don't do X. So, dollars ring true. When we start putting it, we transfer, we go from quantitative to qualitative data, and then be able to determine and assess what's the return on investment, how this is going to either save a company money or increase their value. That's what we do. I think that has the most impact to the dollars and cents, if you can tie it into that. And even, I don't know, a lot of organizations now are worried about their brand, how they're being perceived in the community. You have to speak up on that as well. What do you want the brand of the organization to be? How do you want to move us forward? We can't stay silent. I think those are just the things that, and I'm sure there's others, but that's kind of the work that I'm in. We try to put it towards the brand, because we work with patients, because we want patients to think about, when they think about their health, that they want to come to our facility. They want to come to one of our hospital sites. And so the brand, the commercials, if it's changing, even, how are you being more diverse and thinking about diversity in your commercials? If we're only, speaking to one population of people, how do we think we're going to get those other folks that don't look like that one population of people? So just my initial thoughts about that. That's a great question.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love it. And that's a big deal, because people do talk about their brand, but within that, what does it look like? What does it look like to have someone? Are people represented when you try to attract talent? Does your website, is that representative of who works there? And, I've seen that go wrong for people too. But I love that. And I love how you talked about the tools that are available. I know, having worked in that system with you, that drove a lot of accountability, and especially being on the HR side, it helped me be a better HR business partner to the business. It helped me learn and get insights into what's going on. When you talk about driving accountability, though, if you're doing that and you're anchoring it to goals for these leaders, that's one great way to drive accountability. Because wow, look at what happens when we have data and we use it to inform decisions.
Absolutely.
And suddenly everyone becomes accountable and starts shifting behavior.
Yeah,
So
when it hits their incentive.
yes, that too. Hit the pocketbooks. Any final takeaways, Tiffany, that you want to wrap us up with? Anything, kind of burning top of mind or that you really want to resonate? Obviously, all of this is amazing. You probably saw the chat blowing up, but anything you'd like to leave us with today?
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. And again, I don't take any of this for granted. I know that, in the workplace as leaders, we're all trying to, figure out, our best way forward. But I would have to say, lean on your supports. This type of forum is great. And I'm glad that you two are there to give the space and time for leaders to learn and grow. So I just want to say thank you. And again, I'll share kind of the articles, and I just really appreciate the opportunity. And we're all in this together. We have to commit to making a change. It has to start with us.
Great words to end on. Tiffany, thank you so much. Anyone who wants to stay on when we stop the recording for another 5 or 10 minutes is more than welcome to join us. Tiffany, thank you for all the amazing conversation, for your insights, for your guidance, for your tips. It's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.